Hello, everyone, and I'm here to guide you into a peaceful slumber. If you find this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. I'd love to know where you're from and what time it is as you unwind. So, settle in, get cozy, and let the relaxation begin. The old truck rattled down the dirt road, surrounded by towering pine trees that seemed to lean over us, blocking out the fading sunlight. My name is David Crothers, and I was on my way to my new assignment as a forest ranger in the Whisper Woods National Reserve. After hours of driving, I finally arrived at the ranger's cabin. It was a modest wooden structure situated in the middle of a small clearing surrounded by dense forest. I parked the truck and took a deep breath, savoring the crisp, pine-scented air. "Welcome to Whisper Woods," a voice came from behind me, making me jump. I turned to find an old man standing there, his face weathered and his eyes sharp. "I'm Jim, the outgoing ranger," he said, extending his hand. I shook it, noting the strength in his grip despite his advanced age. "David," I replied. "Nice to meet you." Jim led me on a quick tour of the cabin, explaining the basic duties and where equipment was stored. As we talked, I noticed his eyes constantly darting to the tree line, as if watching for something. "One last thing," Jim said as we finished the tour. His voice had dropped to almost a whisper. "Whatever you do, don't go into the woods at night. And if you hear something calling your name, ignore it." Before I could ask what he meant, Jim was already heading to his own truck. "Good luck, David," he called over his shoulder. "You're gonna need it." As I watched him drive away, a chill ran down my spine despite the warm evening air. What had I gotten myself into? The first few days at Whisper Woods were uneventful. I patrolled the marked trails, checked on campsites, and kept an eye out for any signs of trouble. The forest was beautiful, but there was something off about it. The silence was too deep, the shadows too dark. It was on my fifth night that things began to change. I was sitting on the cabin's porch, enjoying the cool evening air when I heard it. A voice calling my name from the depths of the forest. "David, David." It was faint, almost like a whisper on the wind, but unmistakably there. I froze, remembering Jim's warning. The voice called again, louder this time, and I could have sworn it sounded like my mother, but that was impossible. My mother had passed away years ago. I shook my head, trying to clear it. Must be the wind playing tricks, I thought. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just the wind. Over the next few weeks, the occurrences became more frequent. I'd catch glimpses of movement just at the edge of my vision, only to find nothing there when I turned to look. The voice calling my name became a nightly occurrence, sometimes sounding like my mother, other times like old friends, always trying to lure me into the woods. But it was the footprints that really got to me. I found them one morning after a light rain, huge canine-like prints that suddenly turned into human footprints mid-stride. I followed them for a while, my heart pounding, until they simply vanished, as if whatever made them had simply disappeared into thin air. That night, I finally broke down and called Jim. "Jim," I said when he answered, my voice shaking. "What the hell is going on in these woods?" There was a long pause before he replied. "I was hoping you wouldn't have to find out," he said with a sigh. "But I guess it's time you knew the truth about Whisper Woods." Jim's story chilled me to the bone. According to him, Whisper Woods was home to not one, but two ancient horrors, the Skinwalker and the Wendigo. The Skinwalker, he explained, was a shape-shifting creature from Navajo legend. It could take on the form of any animal, or even mimic the voices of loved ones to lure its prey. The footprints I had found were likely its doing, but the Wendigo, Jim said, his voice dropping to a whisper, "That's the real danger. It's a spirit of hunger and winter, always craving human flesh. It can possess people, drive them to cannibalism. And once you're possessed, there's no coming back." I listened in stunned silence as Jim continued. He told me about the long history of disappearances in Whisper Woods, of rangers driven mad by what they'd seen. The government knew about it, he said, but kept it quiet. Better to lose a few hikers or rangers than to admit the existence of such creatures. But why keep a ranger here at all? I asked. Because someone needs to keep watch, Jim replied. To warn people away when the dangers grow too great. And sometimes to make the hard choices. I didn't want to think about what he meant by hard choices. How do I protect myself? I asked, fear and determination warring inside me. Salt and iron for the skinwalker, Jim said. And fire. Fire works on both of them. But the best protection. Don't let them inside your head. Don't listen to the voices. Don't trust what you see. Your mind is the battlefield, David. Don't lose it. As I hung up the phone, I realized that my simple ranger job had turned into something far more dangerous. I was now a guardian, standing watch against horrors most people couldn't even imagine. Little did I know. My true test was yet to come. As summer faded into autumn, and autumn gave way to winter, the occurrences in Whisper Woods intensified. The voice calling my name became more insistent, sometimes pleading, sometimes angry. I'd wake up to find strange symbols carved into the trees around my cabin, symbols that seemed to shift and change when I wasn't looking directly at them. But it was the dreams that really got to me. Night after night, I found myself wandering through a dark, twisted version of the forest. In these dreams, the trees were gnarled and leafless, their branches reaching out like clawed hands. And always, at the edge of my vision, I could see them dark, hunched shapes that moved with an unnatural fluidity, always just out of clear sight. I'd wake from these dreams drenched in sweat, the taste of fear metallic in my mouth. But the worst part was the hunger, a gnawing, insatiable hunger that no amount of food seemed to satisfy. As winter set in, bringing with it bitter cold and heavy snows, I found myself becoming more and more isolated. The roads became impassable, and my radio communications with the outside world grew increasingly unreliable. I was alone in Whisper Woods, alone with the horrors that lurked in the shadows. It was on the winter solstice, the longest night of the year, that everything came to a head. I was huddled in my cabin, a roaring fire in the hearth and salt lines across every threshold. When I heard it, a blood-curdling scream from somewhere in the forest. My first instinct was to ignore it, to stay safe inside my protected cabin. But then I heard it again, and this time I recognized the voice. It was Sarah, my sister. But that was impossible. Sarah lived hundreds of miles away. She couldn't be here. It's not real, I muttered to myself, remembering Jim's warnings. It's the skinwalker trying to lure me out. But what if I was wrong? What if, by some impossible chance, it really was Sarah out there in danger? Could I live with myself if I didn't at least check? With shaking hands, I grabbed my coat, a flashlight, and the iron fireplace poker. I took a deep breath, steeling myself, and stepped out into the frigid night. The forest was eerily silent, the snow muffling every sound. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, casting long shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. I followed the direction of the scream, my heart pounding in my chest. "Sarah!" I called out, my voice sounding small and insignificant in the vast, uncaring forest. "David!" "Help me!" The voice came from just ahead. I pushed forward, branches clawing at my clothes, the cold biting at my exposed skin. I burst into a small clearing and stopped dead in my tracks. There, in the center of the clearing, was Sarah. But it wasn't Sarah as I remembered her. This Sarah was gaunt, her skin stretched tight over her bones, her eyes sunken and glowing with an unnatural light. When she smiled at me, her teeth were sharp and too numerous. "Hello, brother," the thing that wasn't Sarah said. "I'm so glad you came. I'm so hungry." As it spoke, its form began to shift and twist, growing larger, its limbs elongating. I stood frozen in horror as the creature before me transformed into something that defied description, part human, part animal, with antlers sprouting from its skull and claws that could rend flesh from bone. The Wendigo had revealed itself. With a roar that shook the very trees, it lunged at me. At the last second, I snapped out of my paralysis and swung the iron poker with all my might. It connected with a sickening thud, and the creature reeled back, hissing in pain. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face. I could hear the Wendigo behind me, its inhuman shrieks filling the air. The hunger I had been feeling for weeks intensified, threatening to overwhelm me. I realized with horror that it wasn't my hunger at all. It was the Wendigo's, bleeding into my mind, trying to possess me. As I ran, a new sound joined the chaos. The howl of a wolf, but distorted, wrong. The skinwalker had joined the hunt. I was being pursued by two ancient, terrifying creatures, lost in a dark forest in the dead of winter. My only hope was to make it back to the cabin, to the safety of my salt lines and iron. But as I ran, a terrible thought occurred to me. Even if I survived this night, how long could I hold out? How long before I succumbed to the voices, the visions, the maddening hunger? My lungs burned as I crashed through the underbrush, the howls and shrieks of my pursuers growing ever closer. The cabin was in sight now, a beacon of hope in the darkness. With a final burst of speed, I lunged for the door, wrenching it open and slamming it shut behind me. I leaned against the door, gasping for breath, my heart pounding in my ears. For a moment all was quiet. Then came a sound that chilled me to my core, scratching at the door, right behind my head. "Let us in, David," came a chorus of voices. "My mother, my sister, my friends. We're so cold, so hungry. Don't you love us anymore?" I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out the voices. "You're not real," I muttered. "You're not them." The scratching intensified, and I could hear the wood of the door starting to splinter. I stumbled away, grabbing for anything I could use as a weapon. My eyes fell on the fireplace, and a desperate idea formed in my mind. I grabbed a burning log, ignoring the searing pain in my hand, and turned to face the door just as it burst open. The creatures that entered were a nightmarish blend of human and animal, constantly shifting and changing. But their eyes were fixed on me with a hunger that was all too human. "Back!" I shouted, waving the flaming log. "Stay back!" To my amazement, they recoiled from the fire, hissing and snarling. I pressed my advantage, forcing them back out into the snow. As soon as they were clear of the doorway, I slammed it shut and collapsed to the floor, my mind reeling from what had just happened. As the adrenaline faded, I became aware of a searing pain in my arm. Rolling up my sleeve, I saw a deep gash, likely from a branch as I ran through the forest. But there was something odd about the wound. The edges seemed to be moving, squirming as if alive. A wave of nausea washed over me as I realized the implications. I'd been scratched, possibly infected. Was I going to turn into one of them? The next few days were a blur of fever and hallucinations. I barricaded myself in the cabin, alternating between freezing chills and burning heat. The hunger grew worse, and more than once I caught myself gnawing on my own arm, drawn by the smell of blood. In my more lucid moments, I pored over the old books and documents stored in the cabin, searching desperately for any information that could help me. It was in one of these sessions that I made a startling discovery. Hidden in the back of an old journal, I found a map of Whisper Woods, but this was no ordinary map. It showed ley lines, points of mystical convergence, and at the center of it all, a place marked simply as the heart. The journal spoke of the heart as a place of immense power. Where the veil between worlds was thin, it hinted that this place could be used to banish the Skinwalker and the Wendigo, or to gain control over them. As I stared at the map, a plan began to form in my mind. It was dangerous, possibly suicidal, but it was the only chance I had. I had to find the heart before the infection took me over completely. With shaking hands, I packed a bag with supplies, salt, iron filings, matches, and the few scraps of information I had gleaned from the journal. As I prepared to step out into the wilderness, I caught a glimpse of myself in a mirror. My eyes were sunken, my skin pale, and for a moment I thought I saw antlers beginning to sprout from my head. I shook my head, clearing the vision. There was no more time to waste. I had to find the heart, not just to save myself, but to end the threat to Whisper Woods once and for all. As I opened the cabin door, the cold wind whipped at my face, carrying with it the howls of the creatures that haunted these woods. But underneath it all, I could hear something else, a faint rhythmic pulsing, like a giant heart beating beneath the earth. I took a deep breath and stepped out into the snow. The hunt was on, but this time I was the hunter. With the sounds of destruction growing louder above, I made my decision. I couldn't run, couldn't hide. It was time to face this head-on. I quickly scanned the ritual instructions one last time, committing them to memory. The book spoke of using the Guardian's own essence as a catalyst to restore balance. It was vague, but I had a sinking feeling about what that might mean. Clutching the book to my chest, I ascended the stairs. The cabin was in chaos. The Skinwalker, in the form of a monstrous wolf-like creature, was tearing through one wall, while the Wendigo, all antlers and elongated limbs, was ripping through the roof, their eyes, filled with primal hunger and ancient malice, fixed on me as I emerged from the trapdoor. "Enough!" I shouted, surprised by the power in my own voice. Both creatures paused, seeming startled by my boldness. "I know what I am now," I continued, my voice shaking but determined. "I'm the Guardian, the Balancer, and it's time to set things right." I began to recite the words from the ritual, ancient syllables that felt strange, yet somehow right on my tongue. The air in the cabin began to thicken, charged with an otherworldly energy. The Skinwalker snarled and lunged at me, but an invisible force held it back. The Wendigo shrieked, a sound of both rage and fear. As I spoke the final words of the incantation, I felt a pull from deep within me. My life force, my very essence, was being drawn out. I realized then the true price of the ritual, the Guardian's sacrifice. A blinding light erupted from my chest, engulfing the cabin and the surrounding forest. I could feel tendrils of energy reaching out, connecting me to the Skinwalker, the Wendigo, and to the land itself. In that moment of connection, I understood. These creatures, terrifying as they were as much a part of this land as the trees and the rocks. They weren't evil, just primal forces that needed to be kept in check. I poured my will into maintaining that balance, using my life force as the fulcrum. I could feel myself fading, becoming less corporeal with each passing second. The light intensified, and with a final reality-shaking pulse, it was over. As my vision dimmed, I saw the Skinwalker and Wendigo shrink back, returning to their natural domains in the forest. Balance had been restored. I felt myself dissolving, becoming one with Whisper Woods. My physical form was gone, but my consciousness spread throughout the forest. I was everywhere and nowhere, a part of every tree, every rock, every creature. Years passed in the blink of an eye. I watched as new rangers came and went, each feeling the protective presence in the woods, but never fully understanding it. I saw campers enjoy the forest, blissfully unaware of the ancient forces that lurked just out of sight, now held in check by the sacrifice I had made. Sometimes, on quiet nights, I would reach out to the current rangers, whispering warnings or guidance in their dreams. Some wrote it off as imagination, others learned to listen. All played their part in maintaining the delicate balance. And deep in the heart of the forest, in places where humans rarely tread, the Skinwalker and Wendigo continued their eternal dance, kept in check by the omnipresent spirit of the Guardian. Whisper Woods had earned its name, and in the rustling of leaves and the sighing of wind through branches, those who listened closely might hear a voice, my voice, whispering the oldest story of all, the never-ending struggle between chaos and order, and the sacrifices made to keep the balance. As seasons changed and years rolled by, I remained an eternal guardian spirit of Whisperwoods. The Skinwalker and Wendigo were still there, ancient and powerful, but now held in check by the sacrifice I had made. They were part of the forest's cycle, necessary in their own way, but no longer free to wreak havoc unchecked. New rangers would come, sensing something special about these woods. Some would catch glimpses of things they couldn't explain, a shape-shifting shadow, a figure with antlers vanishing between trees. But the true dangers remained hidden, thanks to my constant vigilance. And so Whisperwoods continued to stand, a place of both beauty and mystery. To most, it was simply an unusually serene forest. But for those who knew how to listen, who could feel the pulse of ancient power beneath their feet, it was so much more. It was a testament to sacrifice, to duty, and to the delicate balance that keeps our world turning. In the end, I had found my true purpose, not as a simple forest ranger, but as an eternal guardian, a spirit of the woods, forever watching, forever protecting. And in the whisper of the wind through the pines, in the babbling of hidden streams, my story lives on. The diesel engine rumbled to life, a familiar sound that had become as comforting to me as a lullaby over the years. I, Frank Wilkes, 48 years old and weathered by 2 decades on the road, settled into the worn leather seat of my Peterbilt 379. The cab smelled of coffee, cigarettes, and the faint lingering scent of pine air freshener, my home away from home. It was 4:30 a.m., and the truck stop was just beginning to stir. A few other drivers milled about, loading up on caffeine and greasy breakfast sandwiches before hitting the road. I'd already done my pre-trip inspection, checked the load, and filed my paperwork. Now it was time to roll. As I pulled out onto the interstate, the sky was just beginning to lighten, a faint pink glow on the horizon promising another scorching summer day. But for now, the air was cool and the road was clear. Perfect driving conditions. I reached for my thermos, taking a long swig of black coffee. The bitter taste helped chase away the last remnants of sleep. I had a long haul ahead of me, 100 miles from upstate New York to a small town in South Carolina. The dispatch had been vague on the details, just gave me an address off Route 95 and a delivery window. "Get it there on time, Frank," Jerry the dispatcher had said. "There's a bonus in it for you." Jerry wasn't one for small talk, which suited me just fine. In this business, you learn to appreciate people who get straight to the point. And a bonus? That was music to my ears. Things had been tight lately. Fuel prices were through the roof, and the company wasn't as generous with covering expenses as they used to be. A little extra cash would go a long way. As the miles ticked by, my mind wandered to what I might do with that bonus. Maybe I'd finally take that trip out to Kansas to see my brother Tom. It had been too long since we'd caught up face to face. Maybe we could even catch a Royals game, just like we used to when we were kids. I thought about calling my daughter Lisa too. She was busy with her own life now, married, 2 kids, a job in marketing or advertising or something. We didn't talk much these days. Not for lack of trying on my part, but, well, I guess that's just how things go sometimes. The sun climbed higher in the sky as I cruised down I-87, the lush green of the Adirondacks giving way to the more settled landscape of the Hudson Valley. Traffic picked up as I neared Albany, but it was nothing I couldn't handle. I'd been doing this long enough to know every trick in the book when it came to navigating busy highways. By the time I hit Pennsylvania, the day was in full swing. The radio crackled with news updates and traffic reports, interspersed with country songs and the occasional trucker's warning about speed traps. I kept one ear on the CB, always alert for any hints of trouble up ahead. It was just past noon when I pulled into a truck stop outside Scranton. My stomach was growling, and I knew better than to push on without a proper meal. Truck stop food might not be gourmet, but it beats the hell out of trying to unwrap a sandwich while doing 70 on the interstate. The diner was busy, filled with the usual mix of truckers, families on road trips and locals grabbing a quick bite. I slid into a booth near the window, giving me a clear view of my rig in the parking lot. Old habits die hard, and in this line of work you learn to keep an eye on your cargo. What'll it be, hon? The waitress, a middle-aged woman with dyed red hair and a name tag that read Doris, and appeared at my table, pen poised over her notepad. Meatloaf special and a coffee. Please, I said, not bothering to look at the menu. You eat enough meals at places like this, you know what's safe to order. As I waited for my food, I couldn't shake a nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach. Something about this run felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it, but after 20 years on the road, you develop a sixth sense for trouble. Maybe it was the vague instructions from dispatch, or the promise of a bonus for what seemed like a straightforward job. Or maybe I was just getting paranoid in my old age. I shook off the feeling as Doris returned with my plate. The meatloaf was dry and the mashed potatoes came from a box, but it was hot and filling. As I ate, I overheard snippets of conversation from nearby tables. Most of it was the usual trucker talk. Complaints about regulations, stories about close calls on the road, boasts about record times between cities. But one conversation caught my attention. Two guys, younger drivers by the look of them, were talking in low voices about a series of strange incidents along I-95. Third one this month, one of them was saying. Always at night, always at those isolated rest stops. You believe that crap? His friend scoffed. Sounds like a ghost story to me. Something to scare the newbies. I'm telling you, man, my cousin's buddy saw it himself. Said the guy just appeared out of nowhere, standing in the middle of the road. Nearly ran him off trying to avoid him. I tried to listen in more closely, but Doris chose that moment to refill my coffee, drowning out their voices. By the time she moved on, the younger drivers had changed the subject, now arguing about the merits of different truck models. As I finished my meal and paid the bill, I found myself mulling over what I'd overheard. Strange incidents on I-95. It was probably nothing, just another tall tale making the rounds. The highways were full of urban legends and trucker folklore. Still, I couldn't quite shake the uneasy feeling that had settled over me. Back in my rig, I did another quick walk around, checking the tires and making sure the load was secure. Everything looked good, but I double-checked the locks on the trailer anyway. Better safe than sorry, especially with the kind of stories I'd just heard. As I pulled back onto the interstate, the sun was already starting to dip towards the horizon. I had a long night of driving ahead of me if I wanted to make good time. The radio kept me company as the miles rolled by, but my mind kept drifting back to those younger truckers and their whispered conversation. What exactly was happening on I-95? And more importantly, was I driving straight into it? The sun had long since set by the time I crossed into Virginia. The highway stretched out before me, an endless ribbon of asphalt illuminated by my headlights and the occasional glow of passing cars. It was the kind of night that could lull you into a false sense of security if you weren't careful. The monotony of the road, the steady hum of the engine, the hypnotic flash of reflectors on the shoulder, it could all conspire to dull your senses if you let it. But I'd been doing this too long to fall into that trap. I kept my eyes moving, scanning the road ahead, checking my mirrors, staying alert for any sign of trouble. The coffee from the diner had worn off hours ago, replaced by a steady stream of energy drinks and the occasional splash of cold water on my face at rest stops. It was just past 2 a.m. when I hit a particularly lonely stretch of I-95. The traffic had thinned out to almost nothing, just the occasional set of headlights in my rearview mirror, quickly receding as I maintained my steady pace. The darkness pressed in on all sides, broken only by the dim glow of my dashboard instruments and the occasional silhouette of trees against the night sky. I was starting to feel the fatigue creeping in, my eyes growing heavy despite my best efforts to stay alert. I knew I needed to find a place to pull over soon, maybe grab a quick nap before pressing on. But the exits were few and far between on this stretch, and I was wary of stopping at just any old rest area, especially after what I'd overheard back at the diner. Just as I was considering pulling onto the shoulder for a quick breather, I spotted a sign for an upcoming rest stop. "Last services for 50 miles, it warned. I figured this was as good a chance as any to refuel, both the truck and myself. As I took the exit, I immediately noticed how run down the place looked. The pavement was cracked and pitted, weeds growing up through the gaps. The lights in the parking area flickered erratically, casting weird shadows across the nearly empty lot. A single rusted-out pickup truck sat in the far corner, its windows dark. I pulled up to the fuel pump, the brakes hissing as I brought the rig to a stop. The place was eerily quiet, the only sound the soft ping of my engine cooling down. I climbed down from the cab, my boots crunching on loose gravel. The air was thick and humid, carrying the faint smell of diesel and something else, something organic and unpleasant that I couldn't quite place. As I started to fuel up, I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. A figure emerged from the shadows near the main building, and for a moment my heart rate spiked. But it was just a kid, couldn't have been more than 20, wearing a faded uniform and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. "Evening," I called out, trying to keep my voice casual. "You work here?" The kid nodded, not saying a word. He shuffled towards me, his movements oddly stiff, almost robotic. When he got closer, I could see his eyes were bloodshot, his skin pale and waxy under the harsh fluorescent lights. "Coffee machine working?" I asked, more to break the uncomfortable silence than out of any real desire for more caffeine. He nodded again, jerking his thumb towards the building. "Inside," he mumbled, his voice flat and emotionless. I finished fueling up and headed inside, the bell above the door jangling discordantly as I entered. The interior was no better than the outside, flickering lights, dirty floors, shelves half empty and disorganized. The coffee machine sat in the corner, looking like it hadn't been cleaned since the Clinton administration. I poured myself a cup anyway, grimacing at the burnt smell. As I turned to pay, I noticed the kid had followed me inside. He stood behind the counter now, staring at me with those bloodshot eyes. "That'll be $3.50, he said, his voice still devoid of any emotion. I handed over a $5, telling him to keep the change. As he rang up the sale, I noticed his hands were shaking slightly. "Drugs, maybe?" It would explain the odd behavior. "Long night?" I asked, trying to make conversation. He didn't respond at first, just stared at me for a long moment. Then, just as I was about to give up and leave, he spoke. "Be careful out there," he said, his voice suddenly intense. "It's not safe." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you mean?" I asked, but he had already turned away, shuffling towards the back of the store. I left quickly after that, the bell jangling behind me as I stepped back into the humid night air. As I walked back to my truck, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong here. The kid's warning echoed in my mind, mixing with the stories I'd overheard earlier. I was just about to climb back into my cab when I saw it. A figure standing in the middle of the parking lot. At first, I thought it might be another driver, maybe someone stretching their legs. But as my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I realized this was something else entirely. The figure was unnaturally tall, at least 6.5 feet, with broad shoulders that seemed too wide to be human. It wore dark clothes, a hoodie pulled low over its face, jeans and heavy boots. But it was the stillness that really got to me. It didn't move, didn't shift its weight, didn't even seem to breathe. It just stood there, facing my truck, as motionless as a statue. I felt my heart start to race, adrenaline flooding my system. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get in the truck and drive, to put as much distance between myself and this thing as possible. But I was rooted to the spot, unable to look away. Slowly, deliberately, I reached for the door handle of my truck. The moment my hand touched the cool metal, the figure's head snapped towards me. I couldn't see its face in the shadows of the hoodie, but I felt its gaze lock onto me with an almost physical force. That's when I saw the knife. It glinted in the flickering light of the fuel station, a long curved blade that the figure held with practiced ease. My blood ran cold as I realized the stories, the warnings. They were all true. I yanked the door open and practically dove into the cab, fumbling with the keys as I tried to start the engine. The whole time, I kept my eyes on the figure, watching as it began to move towards me with slow, purposeful strides. The engine roared to life and I threw the truck into gear, tires squealing as I peeled out of the parking lot. In my side mirror, I could see the figure standing where I had been parked, its head turned to follow my retreat. As I merged back onto I-95, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep them on the wheel. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. Who or what was that figure? What would have happened if I hadn't gotten away? I drove through the rest of the night in a state of hyper-alertness, jumping at every shadow, every set of headlights in my mirror. By the time the sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, I was exhausted, my nerves frayed to the breaking point. But I was alive. I had survived whatever it was back at that rest stop. As the miles rolled by and the day grew brighter, I tried to convince myself that it had all been a hallucination, a product of too many hours on the road and too little sleep. But deep down, I knew the truth. Something was out there, something dangerous, and I had a sinking feeling that my encounter at the rest stop was only the beginning. The sun climbed higher in the sky as I pushed on, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. I hadn't stopped since that encounter at the rest area, too wired and too scared to even consider pulling over again. But as the adrenaline wore off, exhaustion began to set in. My eyes felt gritty, and more than once I caught myself starting to drift. I knew I couldn't keep going like this. It was dangerous, not just for me, but for everyone else on the road. I needed to stop, to rest, to try and make sense of what had happened. But the thought of pulling into another rest area sent a cold shiver down my spine. It was just past noon when I spotted a sign for a truck stop ahead. Not just a rest area, but a proper truck stop with a diner, showers, and most importantly, other people. Safety in numbers, I told myself, even as another part of my brain whispered that it hadn't helped those other drivers who'd gone missing. I took the exit, my heart rate picking up as I navigated the access road. But as the truck stop came into view, I felt some of the tension leave my body. It was busy, with rigs of all sizes filling the parking lot and a steady stream of people moving in and out of the main building. This was familiar territory, the kind of place I'd stopped at hundreds of times over the years. I found a spot to park and shut off the engine, sitting for a moment in the sudden silence. Now that I'd stopped moving, the events of the night came crashing back over me. The rundown rest stop, the eerie attendant, and that thing in the parking lot. It all seemed like a bad dream in the bright light of day, but the fear had been real. The danger had been real, and I knew I couldn't just brush it off. I climbed down from the cab, my legs stiff from hours of driving. The air was thick with the smell of diesel and frying food, and the sound of idling engines created a constant background hum. I made my way towards the main building, my eyes darting around, half expecting to see that tall, dark figure lurking in the shadows. Inside, the diner was crowded and noisy, filled with the chatter of truckers and the clink of cutlery on plates. I found an empty booth near the back, sliding in with a groan as my tired muscles protested. A waitress, her name tag reading Marge, appeared almost immediately, coffee pot in hand. "Rough night, sugar?" she asked, filling my cup without waiting for a response. I nodded, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. "You could say that." Marge gave me a sympathetic look. "You want the usual trucker special?" "Yeah, thanks," I said, not even bothering to look at the menu. I knew it would be eggs, bacon, hash browns, the kind of hearty fare designed to fuel long hours on the road. As Marge walked away, I overheard snippets of conversation from the booth behind me. Two voices, both male, speaking in low, urgent tones. Third one this month. "Always the same MO. You think it's connected to what happened last year?" "Has to be. Too similar to be a coincidence." I found myself straining to hear more, but their voices dropped even lower, barely audible over the clatter of the diner. When Marge returned with my food, I decided to probe a little. "Say, Marge," I began, trying to keep my voice casual, "you hear about anything strange happening on I-95 lately?" Marge's face changed, her friendly smile faltering for just a moment. "Strange how?" she asked, her tone carefully neutral. I shrugged, playing it off. "Oh, you know, just some stories I heard." "Probably nothing." Marge glanced around, then leaned in closer. "Listen, honey," she said, her voice low. "I don't know what you've heard, but be careful out there, okay? Especially at night. Stick to the main roads, stay with other trucks if you can." Before I could ask any more questions, she straightened up and moved on to the next table, leaving me with more questions than answers. I ate quickly, my appetite diminished by the growing sense of unease. As I was finishing up, the two men from the booth behind me got up to leave. One of them, a burly guy with a salt and pepper beard, paused by my table. "Couldn't help but overhear," he said, his voice gruff. "You asking about I-95? I nodded, pushing my empty plate aside. "Yeah, heard some stories. Who thought they were just trucker tales, you know." The man glanced at his companion, then back to me. "Meet us out back in 5 minutes if you want to know more," he said, then walked away without waiting for a response. I sat there for a moment, debating. On one hand, following two strangers behind a truck stop didn't seem like the smartest move. On the other, I needed answers, and these guys seemed to know something. In the end, curiosity won out. I paid my bill and made my way outside, circling around to the back of the building. The two men were waiting, standing next to a beat-up Ford pickup. "Name's Bill," the bearded man said. "This here's Mike." He jerked his thumb towards his companion, a younger guy with a nervous energy about him. "Frank," I replied. "So, what's this all about?" Bill looked around, as if checking for eavesdroppers. "You've seen something, haven't you? Out there on 95? I hesitated, then nodded. "Last night. Some kind of figure at a rest stop. Didn't seem human." Mike let out a low whistle. "You're lucky to be standing here, man. Not everyone who sees it lives to tell the tale. What exactly is it?" I asked. Bill shook his head. "We don't know, not for sure, but it's been happening for months now. Truckers disappearing, abandoned rigs found at rest stops, and always the same description from the few who've seen it and survived. Tall," I said, "unnaturally still. And that knife?" Both men nodded grimly. "That's the one," Bill confirmed. "Listen, Frank, whatever this thing is, it's dangerous. And it seems to be targeting truckers specifically. But why?" I asked. "What does it want?" Mike shrugged. "Your guess is as good as ours. But we've been tracking the incidents, trying to warn as many drivers as we can." Bill reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Here," he said, handing it to me. "It's a list of the rest stops where incidents have been reported. Avoid them if you can, especially at night." I took the paper, my hand shaking slightly. "Thanks," I said. "I appreciate the warning. Just be careful out there," Bill said. "And if you see anything else, anything at all, call the number on that paper." We're trying to gather as much information as we can. As I walked back to my truck, my mind was reeling. What I'd seen wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of something bigger, something that had been going on for months, and now I was caught up in the middle of it. I climbed into my cab, the list of dangerous rest stops clutched in my hand. My delivery deadline suddenly seemed a lot less important in the face of what I'd learned. But I couldn't just abandon my run. I had a job to do, and I needed the money. As I started the engine, I made a decision. I'd continue on to South Carolina, but I'd be a lot more careful about where and when I stopped. And once this run was over, I'd have some serious thinking to do about my future on the road. I pulled out of the truck stop, merging back onto I-95. The highway stretched out before me, familiar yet suddenly alien. As the miles rolled by, I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere out there, in the gathering darkness, something was watching, waiting, and I had a sinking feeling that my encounter with it was far from over. The rest of the day passed in a blur of highway miles and paranoid glances at my rearview mirror. Every time I saw a figure by the roadside or a car pulled over on the shoulder, my heart would race, expecting to see that tall, dark silhouette. But each time, it was just an ordinary traveler or a state trooper doing their rounds. As night fell, the tension ratcheted up another notch. The list Bill had given me felt like it was burning a hole in my pocket. I'd memorized the names of the rest stops to avoid, but that didn't make me feel any safer. If anything, it made the darkness outside my windows seem more menacing, full of unknown threats. I was about an hour north of the South Carolina border when my fuel gauge started creeping towards empty. I'd been pushing it, trying to avoid stopping, but I knew I couldn't make it to my destination without refueling. I scanned the upcoming exit signs, looking for a truck stop that wasn't on Bill's list. Finally, I spotted one that seemed safe, a well-lit pilot travel center just off the highway. I took the exit, my muscles tense as I navigated the access road. The travel center was busy, which I took as a good sign. Plenty of other trucks, a steady stream of cars at the gas pumps. Safety in numbers, I reminded myself. I pulled up to one of the diesel pumps and climbed down from the cab, my eyes darting around as I started to fuel up. Everything seemed normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I tried to tell myself it was just paranoia, the result of too little sleep and too much stress, but the feeling persisted. As I waited for the tank to fill, a car pulled up to the pump on the other side. A woman got out, mid-30s I'd guess, with long dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She glanced my way and gave a polite nod, which I returned automatically. "Long haul?" she asked, gesturing to my rig. I nodded, trying to keep my voice casual. "Yeah, heading down to South Carolina," she smiled. "Same here. Well, not the long haul part. I'm just going to visit my sister in Charleston." I was about to respond when movement caught my eye. A figure was walking across the lot, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing dark clothes. For a moment my heart stopped, but as the figure passed under a light, I saw it was just another trucker heading towards the store. The woman must have noticed my reaction. "You okay?" she asked, her brow furrowed in concern. I forced a smile. "Yeah, sorry. Just tired, I guess. Playing tricks on my eyes." She nodded sympathetically. "I get that. I've done a few long drives myself. You be careful out there, okay? The roads can be dangerous at night. If only she knew, I thought. "Thanks," I said aloud. "You too." I finished fueling up and headed inside to pay and grab some coffee. The store was brightly lit and crowded, which helped ease my nerves a bit. I paid for my fuel and coffee, then headed back to my truck. As I approached my rig, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There was a piece of paper tucked under my windshield wiper. With shaking hands, I pulled it out and unfolded it. In crude, jagged handwriting, it read, "I see you, Frank." I looked around wildly, my heart pounding in my chest. The lot was still busy, people coming and going, but none of them seemed to be paying any attention to me. How had someone known my name? How had they gotten to my truck without me noticing? And then a worse thought hit me. What if it wasn't a person at all? I climbed into my cab and locked the doors, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. As I pulled out of the travel center, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. The highway stretched out before me, dark and foreboding. I knew I should find a safe place to stop, to rest, but the note had shaken me to my core. I didn't feel safe stopping anywhere now. So I drove on into the night, my eyes constantly flicking to the mirrors, watching for any sign of pursuit. The miles ticked by, each one bringing me closer to my destination, but also deeper into what felt like a waking nightmare. As I crossed the South Carolina border, a new thought occurred to me. What if my destination wasn't safe? What if this whole job was some kind of setup? The vague instructions, the promise of a bonus, it all suddenly seemed suspicious. But I was committed now. I had a job to do, and I needed the money. All I could do was stay alert, stay cautious, and hope that I'd make it through this delivery in one piece. As the first hints of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, I saw a sign for my exit coming up. This was it, the final stretch. Whatever was waiting for me at the end of this run, I was about to find out. I took the exit, following the GPS directions down a series of increasingly narrow and poorly maintained roads. The scenery changed from suburban sprawl to rural farmland, and finally to dense forest. The pavement gave way to gravel and then to dirt. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only about 45 minutes, I saw it, a large metal gate set into a high fence with a sign that read, "Private Property, Deliveries Report to Guardhouse." I pulled up to the gate, my heart pounding. A guard emerged from the small building next to the gate, approaching my truck with a clipboard in hand. "Name and business?" he asked, his face impassive. "Frank Wilkes," I replied, my mouth dry. "I have a delivery of farm equipment." The guard checked his clipboard, then nodded. "We've been expecting you, Mr. Wilkes. Follow the road to the main complex. Someone will meet you there to handle the unloading." The gate swung open with a creak of metal, and I drove through feeling like I was entering the lion's den. The road wound through dense forest for another mile before opening up into a large clearing. What I saw there made me gasp. It wasn't a farm. It wasn't anything I could have expected. In the center of the clearing stood a massive, futuristic-looking building, all gleaming metal and tinted glass. Surrounding it were what looked like military-grade security measures, armed guards, security cameras, even what appeared to be some kind of energy fence shimmer. My hands trembled on the steering wheel as I drove towards the complex. This was no farm equipment delivery. I was in way over my head, and I knew it. But there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. I had to see this through. As I approached the main building, a group of men in dark suits emerged from a side entrance. They didn't look like farmers or warehouse workers. They looked like government agents or maybe corporate security. My stomach churned with a mixture of fear and confusion. I brought the truck to a stop, where they indicated and climbed down from the cab on shaky legs. One of the men, a tall, lean figure with close-cropped grey hair, stepped forward. "Mr. Wilkes," he said, his voice smooth and controlled. "Thank you for making this delivery. I'm Mr. Johnson. If you'll follow me, we can complete the paperwork and get you on your way." I wanted to run, to jump back in my truck and flee, but I knew I'd never make it past the gate. So I nodded, following Mr. Johnson towards the building. The other men fell in behind us, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being escorted to my doom. Inside, the building was a maze of sterile white corridors and locked doors with keypad entries. We passed laboratories, where I caught glimpses of complex equipment and people in hazmat suits. What kind of place was this? Finally, we entered a large office. Mr. Johnson sat behind the desk and gestured for me to take a seat opposite him. The other men remained standing, blocking the door. "Mr. Wilkes," Johnson began, "I imagine you have questions." I laughed. a harsh, nervous sound. "Yeah, you could say that." "What is this place? What's really in my truck?" Johnson smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "What's in your truck, Mr. Wilkes, is exactly what you were told, farm equipment. But not the kind you're thinking of." He pressed a button on his desk, and a large screen on the wall flickered to life. What I saw made my blood run cold. It was footage from a highway at night. A tall, dark figure stood in the middle of the road, the same figure I had seen at the rest stop. But as I watched, the figure changed. Its form shifted, limbs elongating, skin rippling. In a matter of seconds, it had transformed into a creature that looked like something out of a nightmare, all sharp angles and gleaming carapace. "What you encountered, Mr. Wilkes," Johnson said, his voice calm, "was not human. It's a being from elsewhere. We've been tracking its activities for months now." My mind reeled. "But what does this have to do with me? With my delivery?" Johnson leaned forward. "The farm equipment in your truck is actually highly specialized containment and research gear. We're going to capture this entity, study it, and you, Mr. Wilkes, have just delivered the final pieces we needed." I felt sick. "So all those missing truckers, all those incidents?" "Regrettable casualties," Johnson said, his tone matter-of-fact, "but necessary for the greater good. This being represents technology beyond our wildest dreams. If we can harness its abilities, the possibilities are endless." I stood up, anger overriding my fear. "You've been using us as bait, sending truckers out there knowing what could happen." Johnson's eyes hardened. "Sit down, Mr. Wilkes. You're in no position to take the moral high ground. You've been part of this operation from the moment you accepted this job." As if on cue, one of the men behind me placed a heavy hand on my shoulder, forcing me back into my seat. "So, what happens now?" I asked, my voice hoarse. Johnson smiled again, and this time it was predatory. "Now, Mr. Wilkes, you have a choice to make. You can join us, be part of something world-changing, or..." He let the alternative hang in the air. Unspoken but clear. I looked around the room, at the impassive faces of the men surrounding me, at the nightmare creature frozen on the screen. I thought about all the truckers who had disappeared, about the terror I'd felt on the road, and I thought about what might happen if this entity, this technology, fell into the wrong hands. In that moment, I made my decision. "I'm in," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "What do you need me to do?" Johnson's smile widened. "Excellent choice, Mr. Wilkes. We'll start by having you make another run. But this time, you'll be carrying some very special cargo." As he began to outline the plan, I felt a part of myself withering away. I was no longer just Frank Wilkes, long-haul trucker. I was now complicit in something dark and dangerous, something that blurred the lines between science fiction and horror. But I was alive. And in this new world I'd stumbled into, that was no small thing. As I left the complex later that day, my truck loaded with equipment I didn't understand, and a mind burdened with knowledge I never wanted, I couldn't help but laugh at the bitter irony. I'd spent my life on the open road, cherishing the freedom it gave me. Now that same road had become my prison. I merged onto I-95, heading north this time. The highway stretched out before me, familiar yet forever changed. And somewhere out there in the gathering darkness, I knew it was waiting, watching. The hunt was on. And this time, I was the hunter. But as the miles rolled by and the sun dipped below the horizon, a nagging question gnawed at the back of my mind. In this deadly game of cat and mouse, who was really the predator and who was the prey? Only time would tell. And out here on the long, dark highway, time was the one thing I had plenty of. In the small town of Evergreen Valley, nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, life moved at a languid pace. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and secrets were as rare as snow in summer. At least, that's what I thought growing up. My name is Daniel Cooper, and this is the story of how my ordinary life in Evergreen Valley took a turn into the extraordinary and terrifying. It's a tale of friendship, loss, and the dark underbelly of a town that seemed too perfect on the surface. I was born and raised in Evergreen Valley, the only child of Mary and John Cooper. My father worked as a forest ranger, while my mother taught at the local elementary school. Our house, a cozy two-story colonial, sat at the edge of town, bordering the vast expanse of whispering woods. From as early as I can remember, the forest was my playground. While other kids spent their summers at the community pool or the baseball diamond, I was scaling trees, building forts, and pretending to be an explorer in uncharted wilderness. It was during one of these solo adventures, at the age of 8, that I met the person who would become my best friend, and ultimately change the course of my life forever. I was attempting to cross Miller's Creek on a fallen log when I lost my balance. Just as I was about to plunge into the icy water, a hand grabbed my arm, steadying me. I looked up to see a boy about my age, with unruly red hair and a face full of freckles, grinning at me. "Whoa there, buddy. That was a close one," he said, helping me regain my footing. "Thanks," I mumbled, embarrassed at nearly falling in front of a stranger. "I'm Chris Hartley," he said, extending his hand. "You live around here?" I shook his hand, introducing myself. "Yeah, just on the edge of town." "You're not from Evergreen Valley, are you?" "I haven't seen you at school." Chris's grin widened. "Nope, just moved here last week. My dad got a job at some research place in the woods. Pretty boring stuff, if you ask me. So I figured I'd do some exploring instead of helping unpack." From that moment on, Chris and I were inseparable. We spent the rest of that summer exploring every inch of whispering woods we could reach. Chris was fearless, always pushing us to venture further, climb higher, and stay out later. He brought an excitement to my life that I hadn't realized was missing. When school started in the fall, Chris and I found ourselves in the same class. We quickly became known as a package deal. Where one of us went, the other was sure to follow. Our teachers often had to separate us to keep us from chatting during lessons. As we grew older, our bond only strengthened. We shared similar interests in music, movies, and books. We both loved science fiction and spent countless hours discussing our favorite stories and coming up with our own fantastical tales. But it wasn't just our shared interests that cemented our friendship. Chris had a way of pushing me out of my comfort zone, encouraging me to take risks and stand up for myself. In return, I helped ground him when his impulsiveness threatened to get him into trouble. One memory that stands out vividly occurred when we were 13. There was a group of older boys who had been bullying some of the younger kids at school. Chris and I had managed to avoid their attention, but one day we saw them picking on a small, quiet boy named Ethan. Before I could stop him, Chris marched right up to the biggest of the bullies. "Hey!" he shouted, his face red with anger. "Why don't you pick on someone your own size?" The bully, a hulking 8th grader named Brock, turned to Chris with a sneer. "Like you, shrimp?" I watched in horror as Brock shoved Chris hard, sending him sprawling onto the ground. Without thinking, I rushed forward, placing myself between Chris and Brock. "Leave him alone," I said, my voice shaking but determined. Brock looked surprised for a moment, then burst out laughing. "Look at this! The dynamic duo thinks they're tough guys now." He raised his fist, and I closed my eyes, bracing for the impact. But it never came. Instead, I heard a stern voice cut through the tension. "What's going on here?" I opened my eyes to see Mr. Thompson, the school principal, standing there with his arms crossed. Brock and his cronies quickly dispersed, mumbling excuses. As Mr. Thompson helped Chris to his feet and checked if we were okay, I felt a mix of relief and exhilaration. It was the first time I had ever stood up to anyone like that, and even though I was terrified, it felt good. Later that day, As Chris and I walked home, he nudged me with his elbow. "Thanks for having my back there, Danny. That was pretty brave." I shrugged, trying to play it cool. "Well, I couldn't let you have all the fun, could I?" Chris laughed, throwing an arm around my shoulders. "You know what? We make a pretty good team." From that day forward, our friendship took on a new dimension. We weren't just two kids who liked hanging out together anymore. We were a team, watching each other's backs and facing the world side by side. As we entered high school, Chris and I remained as close as ever, but our interests began to diverge slightly. I developed a passion for photography, spending hours capturing the beauty of Whispering Woods through my camera lens. Chris, on the other hand, became increasingly fascinated by technology and engineering. Despite these differences, we always made time for each other. Our weekend adventures in the woods continued, now with the added excitement of me documenting our explorations through photographs and Chris bringing along various gadgets he had tinkered with. It was during one of these outings, in the spring of our junior year, that the course of our lives would change forever. We had no way of knowing that the discovery we were about to make would unravel the fabric of our quiet town and test the limits of our friendship. As we ventured deeper into Whispering Woods than we ever had before, neither of us could have imagined the shadows that lurked beyond the trees, waiting to draw us into a mystery that would consume our lives and leave an indelible mark on Evergreen Valley. The day that changed everything started like any other Saturday in late April. The air was crisp with the lingering chill of early spring, but the sun shone brightly, promising warmer days ahead. Chris and I had planned to explore a section of Whispering Woods we had never ventured into before. I arrived at Chris's house just after dawn, my backpack loaded with snacks, water, and my trusty camera. Chris answered the door, his red hair sticking up in all directions, clearly having just rolled out of bed. "Morning, sunshine," I teased. "Ready for our big adventure?" Chris yawned dramatically. "Give me 5 minutes to grab my stuff and chug some coffee." As we set out, the morning dew still clinging to the grass, I couldn't shake a strange feeling of anticipation. It was more than our usual excitement for exploration. Something in the air felt different, charged with an energy I couldn't explain. We followed our usual path into the woods. But instead of turning east towards Miller's Creek as we normally did, we continued north. The trees grew denser, the underbrush thicker, making our progress slow and deliberate. After a couple of hours of hiking, we came across an old, overgrown trail that didn't appear on any of our maps. Chris's eyes lit up with that familiar spark of curiosity. "What do you say we check it out?" he asked, already stepping onto the hidden path. I hesitated for a moment. The trail seemed to lead deeper into a part of the forest that looked darker, more primeval somehow. But Chris was already forging ahead, and I didn't want to be left behind. As we followed the overgrown path, the forest around us changed subtly. The trees seemed older, their trunks wider and gnarled with age. The canopy above grew so thick that only slivers of sunlight penetrated, casting eerie shadows on the forest floor. "Danny, check this out," Chris called from up ahead. I jogged to catch up with him and saw what had caught his attention. Half hidden by vines and moss was a weathered wooden sign. Chris brushed away some of the growth, revealing faded letters. "Evergreen. Research. Facility," Chris read aloud, his voice tinged with excitement. "Property of. The rest is too faded to make out." "Evergreen Research Facility?" I echoed, a chill running down my spine despite the warmth of the day. "I've never heard of anything like that around here." Chris was already pulling out his phone, fingers flying over the screen as he searched for information. "Nothing comes up online," he muttered, frowning. "This is weird, Danny. Your dad's a forest ranger. Has he ever mentioned anything like this?" I shook my head. "Never, but you know how it is with Dad. He doesn't talk much about his work." A mischievous grin spread across Chris's face. "Well, There's only one way to find out what this place is. Before I could protest, he was pushing through the underbrush beyond the sign. With a sigh, I followed, my camera at the ready to document whatever we might find. After another 15 minutes of struggling through dense vegetation, the forest suddenly opened up into a large clearing. In the center stood a complex of dilapidated buildings, their concrete walls stained and crumbling. Partially reclaimed by nature. Holy crap, Chris whispered, his eyes wide with wonder. I raised my camera, snapping photo after photo of the abandoned facility. The main building was 3 stories tall, with broken windows gaping like empty eye sockets. Smaller structures surrounded it, including what looked like a garage and several storage sheds. As we approached the main building, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I turned, scanning the tree line, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. Chris, maybe we should head back, I suggested, my voice quavering slightly. Report this to my dad or something. But Chris was already at the main entrance, examining the heavy metal door. It's not locked, he said, excitement evident in his voice. Come on, Danny. Where's your sense of adventure? Before I could answer, he had pushed the door open with a loud creak and disappeared inside. Cursing under my breath, I followed him, the darkness of the building swallowing me whole. The interior was a maze of corridors and rooms, most filled with rusted equipment and scattered papers. The air was thick with dust and the musty smell of decay. I used the flash on my camera to light our way, the bright bursts illuminating scenes of abandonment and neglect. What do you think they were researching here? I asked, my voice echoing in the empty hallways. Chris shrugged, rifling through a stack of moldy documents on a desk. Hard to say. Most of this stuff is too damaged to read. But look at some of this equipment. It looks advanced, way more high-tech than you'd expect for an old abandoned place like this. As we delved deeper into the facility, the sense of unease grew stronger. In one room, we found rows of large cylindrical tanks, their glass clouded and cracked. Another contained cages of various sizes, some with peculiar scratch marks along the bars. Danny, Chris called from across the room, you need to see this. I made my way over to where he stood in front of a large metal cabinet. The doors hung open, revealing rows of labeled glass vials. Most were empty or broken, but a few still contained small amounts of luminescent liquids in various colors. What is this stuff? I wondered aloud, raising my camera to take a photo. Just as I pressed the shutter button, a loud crash echoed through the building, causing both of us to jump. The sound seemed to come from somewhere below us. Chris's eyes gleamed with a mix of fear and excitement. There must be a basement level. Come on, let's check it out. Are you crazy? I hissed. That could be anything. The floor caving in, an animal, or worse. But Chris was already moving towards the hallway. Or it could be answers, he called back. Don't you want to know what this place really is? Reluctantly, I followed him. We found a stairwell leading down, the steps slick with some kind of dark, damp substance. The further we descended, the colder the air became, until I could see my breath misting in front of me. The basement level was a single cavernous room filled with massive machinery. Most of it was dark and silent, covered in years of dust and cobwebs. But in the center of the room stood a device unlike anything I had ever seen before. It was a towering construct of metal and glass, with a central column that pulsed with a faint, otherworldly light. Tubes and wires sprawled out from it like the tentacles of some mechanical octopus, connecting to various consoles around the room. Chris approached it, his hand outstretched, as if in a trance. "It's warm," he murmured as his fingers touched the metal surface. Suddenly the machine hummed to life. Lights flickered across its surface, and the central column began to glow brighter. A computerized voice crackled through hidden speakers. "Warning, unauthorized activation detected. Initiating containment protocol." Before either of us could react, a blinding flash of light erupted from the machine. I felt a wave of energy wash over me, knocking me off my feet. As my vision cleared, I looked around frantically for Chris. He was gone. Where Chris had been standing moments before, there was now only empty space. The machine pulsed once more, then fell silent, the lights fading back to their previous dim glow. "Chris!" I screamed, my voice echoing in the vast empty room.
"Chris, where are you?"
But there was no answer. My best friend had vanished into thin air, leaving me alone in the bowels of a mysterious facility that by all rights shouldn't even exist. As the reality of the situation sank in, panic overwhelmed me. I scrambled up the stairs, out of the building, and into the fading daylight. My lungs burned as I ran through the forest, branches whipping at my face, until I finally burst out onto the familiar streets of Evergreen Valley. I didn't stop running until I reached the police station, bursting through the doors and collapsing onto the floor, gasping for air. As concerned officers gathered around me, I tried to explain what had happened between ragged breaths. But even as the words left my mouth, I knew how insane it all sounded. An abandoned research facility hidden in the woods, strange machines and glowing liquids, and worst of all, my best friend vanishing into thin air. The skeptical looks on the officers' faces told me everything I needed to know. They didn't believe me. And why should they? It sounded like the plot of a bad science fiction movie, not something that could happen in quiet, normal Evergreen Valley. As I sat in the police station, repeating my story to increasingly doubtful authorities. Whatever had happened in that facility, whatever had taken Chris, it was far from over. The mystery of Whispering Woods and the Evergreen Research Facility had only just begun, and I was now irrevocably entangled in its dark and dangerous web. The days following Chris's disappearance passed in a blur of police interviews, search parties, and sleepless nights. The authorities treated it as a missing person case, but their efforts were focused on the areas of Whispering Woods that we normally frequented, not the uncharted territory where the research facility stood. I tried multiple times to lead search parties to the facility, but each attempt ended in failure. It was as if the path we had taken that fateful day had vanished, swallowed up by the dense forest. The more I insisted on the existence of the abandoned buildings, the more doubtful and concerned the adults around me became. My parents were beside themselves with worry, both for Chris and for my mental state. I overheard them discussing the possibility of trauma-induced delusions, and the word therapy was mentioned more than once. Chris's parents, the Hartleys, were devastated. Mrs. Hartley spent most of her time either crying or staring blankly at the wall, while Mr. Hartley threw himself into organizing search efforts with a frantic energy that bordered on mania. I couldn't bring myself to look them in the eye, feeling a crushing guilt for not having stopped Chris from entering that accursed building. As the days turned into weeks, the initial frenzy of the search began to die down. The police, having found no trace of Chris or the mysterious facility I described, started to treat the case as a potential runaway situation. This theory gained traction when it was discovered that some of Chris's clothes and his emergency cash stash were missing from his room. But I knew the truth. Chris hadn't run away. He had vanished before my very eyes, taken by something beyond our understanding. The problem was, I had no way to prove it. It was during this time that I noticed strange things starting to happen around town. At first they were small, easily dismissed occurrences, lights flickering more often than usual, electronics behaving erratically, an unusually high number of pets going missing from their yards. Then the nightmares began. Every night I found myself back in that basement, watching Chris disappear over and over again. But in my dreams, I could hear him screaming, calling out for help from some impossibly distant place. I would wake up in a cold sweat, his cries echoing in my ears. As the summer wore on, my obsession with finding the truth grew. I spent every free moment combing through old town records, researching the history of Whispering Woods, and trying to find any mention of the Evergreen Research Facility. My room became a chaos of maps, printouts, and hastily scribbled notes. It was during one of these late-night research sessions that I made my first real breakthrough. Buried in the archives of the local library, I found a newspaper clipping from 1962. The headline read, "Government approves new research facility in Whispering Woods." The article was vague about the nature of the research, citing only advancements in energy and physics as the facility's purpose. But it was proof that I wasn't crazy, that the facility had existed. Armed with this new information, I went to the police station, hoping they would reopen the case. Officer Brennan, a kindly middle-aged man who had always been patient with me, listened as I excitedly explained my discovery. "Daniel," he said gently when I finished, "I understand you're still hurting from Chris's disappearance. We all are. But this article, it's from over 60 years ago. Even if this facility did exist back then, it doesn't prove anything about what happened to Chris." I left the station feeling defeated, but more determined than ever. If the authorities wouldn't help me, I'd have to find the truth on my own. It was around this time that I noticed someone new in town. A woman in her early 30s, with short, dark hair and intense green eyes. I first saw her at the local diner, sitting alone in a booth, scribbling furiously in a notebook. What caught my attention was the way she kept glancing around, as if checking to see if anyone was watching her. Over the next few days, I saw her several more times around town. Always alone, always watchful. My curiosity piqued. I decided to follow her one afternoon as she left the diner. She led me to the edge of town, right up to the border of Whispering Woods. There, she met with a man I recognized as Dr. Harris, the high school physics teacher. They spoke in hushed tones, their body language tense and urgent. As I crept closer to try and overhear their conversation, I accidentally stepped on a dry twig. The sharp crack seemed to echo through the trees. Both the woman and Dr. Harris whipped around, their eyes scanning the area. I ducked behind a large oak tree, my heart pounding. When I peeked out again, they were gone, as if they had vanished into thin air. That night, as I lay in bed trying to make sense of what I'd seen, a soft tapping sound came from my window. Cautiously, I approached, pulling back the curtain to find a folded piece of paper stuck to the outside of the glass. With trembling hands, I opened the window and retrieved the note. Inside, in neat, precise handwriting, were 5 words that sent a chill down my spine. "We need to talk, Dr. Harris." As I stared at the note, a mix of fear and excitement coursed through me. Finally, someone was reaching out, someone who might have answers. But why the secrecy? And how was Dr. Harris involved in all of this? Little did I know, this mysterious message would be the key to unlocking a conspiracy far larger and more terrifying than I could have ever imagined. The quiet town of Evergreen Valley was about to reveal its darkest secrets, and I was standing at the threshold of a truth that would change everything. The next day at school, I could barely focus on my classes. My eyes kept darting to the clock, counting down the minutes until my scheduled physics class with Dr. Harris. As I entered the classroom, our eyes met briefly, and I saw him give an almost imperceptible nod. After class, as the other students filed out, Dr. Harris called out, "Daniel, could you stay back for a moment? I'd like to discuss your last assignment." Heart-pounding, I approached his desk. Once we were alone, Dr. Harris's demeanor changed completely. The friendly, slightly absent-minded teacher was replaced by a man with a grave expression and eyes that darted nervously to the door. "Daniel," he said in a low voice, "what you saw yesterday, you must understand the danger you're in. The woman I was meeting, her name is Agent Lydia Chen. She's with let's call it a specialized branch of the government. I opened my mouth to ask a question, but Dr. Harris held up a hand to stop me. No, let me finish. We don't have much time. The facility you found, the one where Chris disappeared, it wasn't abandoned. It was dormant. And now, because of what happened with Chris, it's active again. My mind reeled with this information. But what is it? What were they doing there? And what happened to Chris? Dr. Harris sighed heavily. The full truth is complicated and dangerous. But I'll tell you what I can. The Evergreen Research Facility was built to study and experiment with interdimensional travel. He must have seen the skepticism on my face because he quickly added, I know how it sounds, Daniel, but after what you saw happen to Chris, can you really discount the possibility? I thought back to that moment in the basement, the flash of light, Chris vanishing into thin air. Slowly I nodded. The experiments they were conducting, they were groundbreaking but incredibly dangerous. There were incidents, people disappearing, strange phenomena occurring in town. Eventually the government shut it down, or so we thought. We? I interrupted. Dr. Harris gave a sad smile. Yes, we. I was a young researcher there, fresh out of college. When they shut us down, most of us were reassigned or sworn to secrecy. I chose to stay in Evergreen Valley to keep an eye on things. Make sure it stayed dormant. But now it's active again, I said, the implications slowly sinking in. Because of us. Because of me and Chris. Dr. Harris nodded gravely. And that's not the worst of it. Whatever took Chris, we think it might have been trying to come through to our side. A chill ran down my spine as I processed this information. So what do we do now? Well, now you need to be careful. Don't trust anyone, not even your parents. There are people in this town who are not what they seem. Dr. Harris scribbled something on a piece of paper and handed it to me. This is a secure email address. If you notice anything strange, anything at all, contact me immediately. As I left the classroom, my head spinning with this new information, I felt like I had stepped into a different world. The familiar hallways of Evergreen Valley High suddenly seemed alien and threatening. Every face I passed could be hiding secrets. Every shadow could be concealing something unnatural. That night, as I lay in bed trying to process everything Dr. Harris had told me, a soft blue light began to emanate from my closet. Cautiously I approached, my heart pounding in my chest. As I opened the closet door, I found the source of the light, my old walkie-talkie. The one Chris and I used to use during our childhood adventures was glowing and emitting a low, pulsing hum. With trembling hands, I picked it up. Through the static, I heard a voice, Chris's voice, faint and distorted but unmistakable. Danny, help. Not alone here. The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving me standing in the dark, clutching the now silent walkie-talkie. In that moment, I knew that no matter the risk, no matter the danger, I had to find a way to bring Chris back. Little did I know. This was just the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything I thought I knew about reality, push the boundaries of science and the supernatural, and force me to confront the darkest secrets of Evergreen Valley. As I stood there in the dark, the echo of Chris's plea ringing in my ears, I made a silent vow. I would uncover the truth about the Evergreen Research Facility. I would find out what really happened to Chris, and I would bring him home, no matter the cost. The quiet town of Evergreen Valley had become the center of a cosmic mystery. The days following Dr. Harris's revelation and Chris's mysterious transmission were a blur of paranoia and sleepless nights. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat. Every casual conversation felt like it could be a carefully orchestrated interrogation. The weight of the secret I now carried pressed down on me, making it hard to breathe, hard to think. At school, I found myself scrutinizing my classmates and teachers, wondering who might be involved in the conspiracy. Was the cafeteria lady's lingering gaze a sign of suspicion, or was I just being paranoid? Did Mr. Johnson, the janitor, always linger near the science wing, or was he keeping an eye on Dr. Harris? I started noticing other things too. Small details that I might have overlooked before now seemed significant. The way certain streetlights in town would flicker in a specific pattern. The increasing number of weather balloons that seemed to hover over Whispering Woods. The subtle changes in people's behavior. A nervous tick here, an out-of-character comment there. One afternoon, about a week after my conversation with Dr. Harris, I was walking home from school when I noticed something odd. A van was parked across the street from my house, its windows tinted so dark they were almost black. As I approached, the van started up and slowly drove away. Heart pounding, I rushed inside and up to my room. I pulled out my laptop and composed a quick email to Dr. Harris, describing what I'd seen. His reply came within minutes. Stay calm. Don't do anything to arouse suspicion. Meet me at the old water tower at midnight. Come alone and make sure you're not followed. The hours until midnight crawled by with agonizing slowness. I made a show of going to bed early, telling my parents I had a headache. Then at 11:30, I quietly slipped out of my window and into the night. The old water tower stood at the edge of town, a rusted relic from a time before Evergreen Valley had a modern water system. As I approached, I saw a figure standing in its shadow. For a moment, fear gripped me. What if this was a trap? But then the figure stepped into the moonlight, revealing Dr. Harris's familiar face. "Good. You made it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We don't have much time. They're watching us more closely now." "Who's watching us?" I asked. "The same people who ran the facility. They never really left Evergreen Valley, just went underground. Now that the facility is active again, they're mobilizing." Dr. Harris reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device, about the size of a cell phone. "This is a prototype we were working on before the shutdown. It's designed to detect interdimensional energy fluctuations. I've modified it to home in on the specific frequency we recorded when Chris disappeared." He handed me the device. It was heavier than it looked, with a small screen displaying a series of incomprehensible numbers and a pulsing dot. "That dot represents the strongest source of interdimensional energy," Dr. Harris explained. "Right now it's pointing towards the facility in Whispering Woods, but it's been moving." "Moving?" I echoed, a chill running down my spine. Dr. Harris nodded grimly. "Whatever came through when Chris disappeared, it's not staying put. It's exploring, learning, and I fear it may be looking for a way to bring more of its kind through." As if on cue, the device in my hand began to beep softly. The pulsing dot on the screen was moving, heading towards the edge of the screen. "It's on the move again," Dr. Harris said, his voice tight with tension. "We need to track it, try to understand what it's doing. But Daniel, you must promise me something. Do not, under any circumstances, try to confront this thing on your own. It's dangerous beyond your imagination." I nodded, my mouth dry with fear and excitement. "What about Chris? Is there any way we can use this to find him?" Dr. Harris's expression softened slightly. "I'm working on it. The energy signature from the transmission you received? It was like nothing I've ever seen before. It's as if Chris is trapped between dimensions, able to reach out but not fully cross over. But every time he makes contact, it leaves a trace. If we can collect enough of these traces, we might be able to triangulate his location in whatever space he's in." As we stood there in the shadow of the water tower, the gravity of the situation fully hit me. This wasn't just about finding Chris anymore. The fate of our entire town, maybe even our world, could be at stake. "What do we do now?" I asked. "For now, we watch and wait," Dr. Harris replied. "Use the device to track the entity's movements. Record any unusual occurrences in town. And most importantly, trust no one. The people behind the facility, they have eyes and ears everywhere." As I made my way home that night, the device hidden safely in my backpack, I felt as if I had crossed a point of no return. The quiet, normal life I had known was gone, replaced by a world of shadows, secrets, and cosmic horrors. Little did I know, the true tests of my resolve and sanity were yet to come. The entity from the facility was just the beginning. Something far darker and more terrifying was stirring in the heart of Evergreen Valley. Something that would push me to the very limits of what I thought was possible, and beyond. As I climbed back through my bedroom window, the first light of dawn was just beginning to creep over the horizon. A new day was dawning in Evergreen Valley, but for me, it felt like the sun might never truly shine again. The next few weeks passed in a blur of paranoia and sleepless nights. I found myself jumping at every unexpected sound, scrutinizing every casual interaction for hidden meanings. The device Dr. Harris had given me became my constant companion. Its soft beeping, a reminder of the invisible threat lurking in our town. I started keeping a journal, meticulously recording every strange occurrence I noticed. Lights flickering in patterns that seemed almost like code. Animals behaving erratically, as if fleeing from an unseen predator. And most disturbing of all, people in towns starting to act different. It was subtle at first. Mrs. Abernathy, the sweet old lady who ran the local bakery, snapping at customers in a way that was completely out of character. The usually boisterous high school quarterback, suddenly quiet and withdrawn. My own parents, having hushed conversations that would abruptly stop whenever I entered the room. But the most unsettling changes were happening to me. I started having vivid, terrifying dreams. In them, I would find myself wandering through twisted, impossible landscapes, alien geometries that hurt my eyes to look at, and always in the distance, I could hear Chris calling for help. I would wake from these dreams drenched in sweat, my heart pounding, and sometimes, in those moments between sleep and waking, I could swear I saw shadows moving in the corners of my room, disappearing as soon as I turned to look at them directly. One night, about 3 weeks after my midnight meeting with Dr. Harris, I was jolted awake by the sound of static coming from my closet. Heart racing, I approached, already knowing what I would find. The old walkie-talkie was active again, glowing with that eerie blue light. I grabbed it with trembling hands, straining to hear through the crackling static. "Danny, it's getting stronger, and can't hold on much longer." Chris's voice was weaker this time, barely audible through the static. "They're changing people. Be careful. Don't trust." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving me clutching the silent walkie-talkie in the dark. My mind raced, trying to make sense of Chris's fragmented warning. Who was changing people, and who couldn't I trust? I reached for the device Dr. Harris had given me, which I now kept on my nightstand. The pulsing dot on the screen was moving rapidly, heading towards the center of town. Without thinking, I threw on some clothes and sneaked out of the house. The streets were eerily quiet as I followed the signal. The dot led me to the town square, where I ducked behind a bush, peering out at the empty space. For a moment, nothing happened. Then I saw it, a shimmer in the air, like heat waves rising from hot asphalt. But it was a cool night. The shimmer coalesced into a vaguely humanoid shape, translucent and shifting. I held my breath, watching in horror and fascination as the entity moved across the square. It paused by the statue of the town's founder, reaching out with a limb that seemed to phase in and out of existence. Where it touched the statue, the metal began to corrode and twist, taking on impossible shapes. Suddenly the entity's form flickered, and for a split second, I saw something else. A mass of writhing tentacles, eyes that shouldn't exist, a mouth full of teeth that defied geometry. I bit back a scream, my mind reeling from what I'd just witnessed. The entity's head snapped in my direction, and I knew with certainty that it had sensed me. Without thinking, I turned and ran, not daring to look back. I didn't stop until I was back in my room, door locked, huddled under my blankets like a child afraid of the dark. As the adrenaline wore off, I realized two things. First, I now had concrete proof that something otherworldly was loose in Evergreen Valley. And second, I was in way over my head. The next morning, I emailed Dr. Harris describing what I'd seen. His reply was terse. "Meet me at the old quarry after school. Don't tell anyone." The day crawled by, each minute feeling like an hour. When the final bell rang, I practically ran out of the school, my mind focused on the upcoming meeting. The old quarry was on the outskirts of town, long abandoned and overgrown. As I approached the meeting spot, I saw not just Dr. Harris, but the woman I'd seen him with before, Agent Chen. "Daniel," Dr. Harris said, his face grave. "What you saw last night, it confirms our worst fears. The entity isn't just exploring. It's changing our reality little by little." Agent Chen stepped forward. "We've been monitoring similar incidents across town. The entity seems to be preparing the environment. For what, we're not sure, but it can't be good." "What about the people acting strange?" I asked. "Chris said something about them being changed." Dr. Harris and Agent Chen exchanged a look. "We think the entity is capable of influencing people," Dr. Harris said carefully. "Possibly even possessing them to some degree." "Then how do we know who to trust?" I demanded, fear and frustration bubbling up inside me. "That's the problem," Agent Chen said softly. "We don't." As the implications of this sank in, I felt the ground shifting beneath my feet, both literally and figuratively. The world as I knew it was unraveling, and I was caught in the middle of it all. Little did I know, this was just the beginning. The entity's presence was like a stone dropped in a pond, and the ripples were about to become waves that would threaten to drown us all. As we stood there in the quarry, discussing plans and theories, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The shadows seemed to grow longer. The wind whispered secrets just beyond my understanding. And somewhere, in a place between dimensions, I knew Chris was still calling for help. The sun began to set, casting an eerie red glow over the quarry. As we prepared to leave, Dr. Harris placed a hand on my shoulder. "Remember, Daniel," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of knowledge. "In this new reality we're facing, nothing is as it seems. Trust your instincts, question everything, and above all, be careful." I nodded, a lump forming in my throat. As I made my way home in the gathering darkness, I realized that my quest to find Chris had become something much bigger, much more dangerous. I was now a player in a cosmic game, with the fate of Evergreen Valley, and perhaps the world hanging in the balance. The lights of my house came into view, and for a moment I hesitated. How could I face my parents knowing what I knew? How could I pretend that everything was normal when reality itself was under attack? But I had no choice. I had to keep going, had to find a way to stop this entity and save Chris. As I walked up the driveway, I steeled myself for whatever challenges lay ahead. As autumn descended upon Evergreen Valley, bringing with it a chill in the air and leaves of gold and crimson, the sense of wrongness in the town grew stronger. The entity's influence was spreading, subtle but unmistakable to those who knew what to look for. I found myself constantly on edge, jumping at shadows and scrutinizing every interaction for signs of otherworldly influence. The device Dr. Harris had given me beeped more frequently now, the pulsing dot on its screen moving in increasingly erratic patterns. One crisp October morning, I woke to find a thin layer of frost on my bedroom window. But as I looked closer, I realized the frost wasn't forming random patterns. Instead, it seemed to be arranging itself into complex, fractal-like shapes that hurt my eyes to look at directly. I quickly snapped a photo with my phone and sent it to Dr. Harris. His response came within minutes. "It's accelerating." Meet at the library after school. Bring the device. The day crawled by, each class feeling like an eternity. I couldn't focus on the lessons, my mind constantly drifting to the frost patterns and what they might mean. When the final bell rang, I practically ran to the library. Dr. Harris and Agent Chen were waiting for me in a secluded corner of the reference section. Their faces were grim, and I could see the toll that recent events had taken on them. Dark circles underlined their eyes, and Dr. Harris's normally neat appearance was disheveled. "Show us the device," Agent Chen said without preamble. I pulled it out of my backpack and handed it over. She studied the readouts, her frown deepening. "The energy signatures are off the charts," she muttered. "It's like the barrier between dimensions is getting thinner." Dr. Harris nodded solemnly. "We've been picking up similar readings all over town. The entity isn't just influencing our reality anymore. It's merging it with its own." A chill ran down my spine. "What does that mean for us? For the town? If we can't stop it," Dr. Harris said, his voice barely above a whisper, "Evergreen Valley might cease to exist as we know it. It could become a pocket of alien reality, a beachhead for whatever lies on the other side to enter our world." The gravity of the situation hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just about finding Chris anymore. The entire town, maybe even the world, was at stake. "But that's not all," Agent Chen added, her eyes meeting mine. "We've been monitoring the frequencies of the transmissions you've been receiving from Chris. They're changing, becoming more coherent." My heart leapt. "Does that mean we're closer to finding him?" Dr. Harris and Agent Chen exchanged a look. "Possibly," Dr. Harris said cautiously. "But it could also mean that wherever Chris is, it's being affected by the thinning of the dimensional barriers too. He might be able to reach out more easily, but so might other things," I finished, a new fear gripping me. Agent Chen nodded. "We need to act fast. We think we've pinpointed the epicenter of the dimensional disturbances. It's..." She was cut off by a sudden high-pitched whine from the device. The screen flickered, and for a moment I saw a series of symbols I didn't recognize flash across it. "It's happening," Dr. Harris breathed, his face pale. "The veil between dimensions. It's starting to tear." As if on cue, the lights in the library flickered. Books began to fall from shelves, their pages flipping wildly as if caught in an unfelt wind. And then I heard it. A voice, not from the device, but seemingly from the air around us. "Danny, they're coming through. You have to stop them." It was Chris's voice, clearer than I'd ever heard it since his disappearance. But there was an edge of panic to it that made my blood run cold. Before any of us could react, a deafening crack split the air. A shimmer appeared in the center of the library, like heat haze, but more solid. It widened, forming a tear in the very fabric of reality. Through that tear, I caught a glimpse of a world that should not be. Impossible geometries, colors that had no name, and entities that defied description. And they were looking back at us. "Run!" Agent Chen yelled, grabbing my arm and pulling me towards the exit. As we fled the library, I could hear inhuman sounds behind us, a cacophony of screeches and growls that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. We burst out onto the street, only to find that the situation outside was no better. The sky had taken on a sickly, swirling quality, and more tears were appearing all over town. People were running, screaming, as things beyond comprehension began to slip through into our world. "We need to get to the facility," Dr. Harris panted as we ran. "It's the source of all this. If we can shut it down, we might be able to close the tears." As we raced through the chaos-engulfed streets of Evergreen Valley, I realized that we had reached the point of no return. The battle for our reality had begun, and I was right in the middle of it, with Chris's warning echoing in my mind and the fate of everything I knew hanging in the balance. I steeled myself for what was to come. Whatever horrors awaited us at the Evergreen Research Facility, I knew I had to face them. For Chris, for my town, and for the very fabric of reality itself. As we raced through the chaotic streets of Evergreen Valley, the world around us seemed to be unraveling. The sky roiled with unnatural colors, and rifts in the fabric of reality appeared and disappeared in dizzying succession. The air was thick, with an otherworldly static that made my skin crawl. Dr. Harris led the way, his face a mask of grim determination. Agent Chen brought up the rear, constantly scanning our surroundings for threats. I was sandwiched between them, clutching the beeping device that was our only guide in this madness. "We're getting close." Dr. Harris shouted over the cacophony of screams and inhuman noises that filled the air. "The facility should be just beyond Whispering Woods." As we approached the tree line, I noticed something unsettling. The trees were changing. Their bark writhed as if alive, branches twisting into impossible shapes. Some seemed to be fusing together, forming grotesque arches and tunnels. "Don't touch anything," Agent Chen warned as we entered the warped forest. "Who knows what effect it could have on you?" We pushed on, the device in my hands beeping more frantically with each step. The forest around us grew darker, the twisted trees blocking out what little light remained in the sky. Strange bioluminescent fungi pulsed in the shadows, casting an eerie glow over our path. Suddenly, a blood-curdling shriek pierced the air. We froze, watching in horror as a creature that defied description emerged from behind a gnarled tree. It was like a twisted amalgamation of insect and reptile, with too many limbs and eyes that seemed to look in all directions at once. Before we could react, Agent Chen had her weapon out, a sleek silver gun unlike anything I'd ever seen. She fired, and a bolt of blue energy struck the creature, causing it to dissolve into a puddle of iridescent goo. "Interdimensional nullifier," she explained briefly. "Won't work on everything, but it should buy us some time." We pressed on, encountering more bizarre and terrifying entities as we got closer to the facility. Each encounter left me more shaken, my mind struggling to process the impossible things I was witnessing. Finally, we broke through the tree line into a familiar clearing. The Evergreen Research Facility stood before us, but it was barely recognizable. The once abandoned buildings were now alive with pulsating energy, their structures warped and twisted into mind-bending configurations. At the center of it all was the main building, now a towering monstrosity that seemed to stretch impossibly high into the swirling sky. A pillar of crackling energy shot up from its peak, puncturing the very fabric of reality. "My God," Dr. Harris breathed. "It's worse than I thought. The facility isn't just a conduit anymore. It's become a beacon, calling out to other dimensions." "How do we stop it?" I asked, my voice trembling. Before Dr. Harris could answer, a familiar voice cut through the chaos, not from the device this time, but from the air around us. "Danny!" "Dr. Harris, you have to hurry." It was Chris's voice, clearer than ever. "The core! You have to shut down the core." "It's in the basement where I disappeared. But be careful, they don't want you to stop it. They're using it to break through completely." "Chris!" I shouted. "Where are you? How can we get you back?" I'm everywhere and nowhere," his voice replied, tinged with fear and confusion. "This place, it's not like our world. Time and space don't work the same way. But I think if you shut down the core, it might pull me back. But Danny, whatever happens, you have to stop this. The fate of our world depends on it." His voice faded, leaving us in the eerie glow of the transformed facility. Dr. Harris turned to us, his face set with resolve. "You heard him. We need to get to the basement and shut down the core. It won't be easy. Whoever or whatever is behind this will fight us every step of the way." Agent Chen checked her weapon. "I'll take point. Daniel, stay between us. And remember, trust nothing you see in there. This close to the source, reality itself will be fluid, As we approached the entrance to the facility, the air grew thick with tension. I could feel the weight of what we were about to do pressing down on me. This wasn't just about saving Chris anymore. The fate of our entire world hung in the balance. As we entered the facility, reality seemed to warp around us. Corridors stretched and twisted, defying the laws of physics. Shadows moved of their own accord, and whispers in unknown languages echoed through the halls. We fought our way through waves of interdimensional horrors, Agent Chen's weapon proving invaluable. Dr. Harris guided us with his knowledge of the facility's layout, though even he seemed disoriented by the nightmarish transformations. Finally, we reached the basement. The massive machine that had taken Chris now dominated the entire space, pulsing with eldritch energy. "There!" Dr. Harris shouted over the deafening hum. "The control panel!" As we approached, a figure materialized before us. It was Chris, but not as I remembered him. His form flickered and shifted, as if he wasn't fully in our reality. "Danny," he said, his voice echoing strangely. "You made it." "Chris!" I moved towards him, but Agent Chen held me back. "Wait," she warned. "Something's not right." Chris's face twisted into an inhuman grin. "Smart woman, but too late." Suddenly, Chris's form exploded into a mass of writhing tentacles and eyes. The entity that had been masquerading as my friend lunged at us. Agent Chen fired her weapon, but the creature shrugged off the blast. Dr. Harris was knocked aside, leaving me face to face with the horror. In that moment, I heard Chris's true voice in my head. "Danny, the device! Use the device!" Acting on instinct, I pulled out the energy-detecting device and held it towards the creature. It emitted a high-pitched whine, and the entity recoiled in pain. "The frequency!" Dr. Harris yelled, struggling to his feet. "It's disrupting its form." I cranked up the device to its maximum setting. The creature writhed and shrieked, its form destabilizing. "Now, Danny!" Chris's voice urged. "Shut it down!" I lunged for the control panel, slamming my hand down on the emergency shutdown button. The machine's hum rose to a deafening crescendo, then abruptly cut off. A shockwave of energy exploded outward, and everything went white. When I came to, I was lying on the floor of the basement. The machine was silent, its lights dark. Dr. Harris and Agent Chen were slowly getting to their feet. And there, in the center of the room, was Chris, the real Chris, solid and whole. "Danny," he said weakly, "we did it." As we embraced, tears streaming down our faces, I knew it was over. The rifts in reality were closing, the interdimensional invasion thwarted. In the days that followed, Evergreen Valley slowly returned to normal. The government covered up the incident, attributing the strange events to mass hysteria caused by a gas leak. Only a handful of us knew the truth. Chris struggled to adapt to being back, his memories of the other dimension fading like a dream. Dr. Harris retired from teaching, dedicating himself to studying the data we'd gathered. Agent Chen disappeared, but I had a feeling we hadn't seen the last of her. As for me, I was changed forever. I knew now that reality was far stranger and more fragile than I'd ever imagined. But I also knew the power of friendship, courage, and determination in the face of cosmic horrors. Evergreen Valley was safe for now, but as I looked up at the stars at night, I couldn't help but wonder what other secrets and dangers lurked in the vast, unknown reaches of the multiverse.